You're listening to Parents You've Got This, the expert guide to parenthood, the complete guide to fertility, pregnancy, birth, baby and parenthood. This podcast is proudly supported by Mistela, a natural origin skincare for babies and children, recommended by healthcare professionals. Mistela by Parents' Side since 1950.
Thanks for tuning into the Expert Guide to Parenthood podcast. We're your hosts, Christy and Freya, and we have been inundated with questions about exercise and pregnancy. So this week on the podcast, we're going to be talking all about this. We are welcoming back to the podcast mic our obstetrician and gynaecologist expert, Dr. Peter Jurcevic. Dr. Peter Jurcevic has more than 30 years of experience and he works in both the public and private systems. He has seen thousands of parents start their parenting journey and grow their families, and we are really excited today to pick his brain on this very important topic. So Pete, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Let's
start off about talking why is being healthy and staying fit important in pregnancy?
Sure. There are a whole lot of common sense reasons to the answer that are not even relevant to pregnancy, just for your own general health and well-being and longevity. But in pregnancy, when you are nurturing and growing a baby, and then for those of you who will be going through a birth process at the end, and particularly those who are going to attempt a normal delivery, fitness is important. So for maintenance of health during the pregnancy, for well-being, for psychological health, the benefits from the endorphins of exercise, for helping certain ailments and things you might have. For example, if you're getting some core-related, pelvic back pain issues, where certain exercises can be useful or certain exercises best avoided. And then, of course, for the endurance required at the end when you're going to go and birth and try to have a baby, exercise has profound benefits.
Are there any rules in regards to exercise around pregnancy throughout the trimesters?
You'll be interested to know there's no such thing as actual rules and probably no actual guidelines in the literature. But again, it often comes down to a lot of common sense. I talk about this analogy of in pregnancy, just by virtue of the physiology, the way your heart's beating and the blood's flowing in your body, the way you're breathing, your respiratory rate, your metabolism, etc., that your body's sort of revved up, and it's done so, of course, because you're you and you have to function, but you're also growing a baby. And so when you're sitting there, your body's still sort of a step ahead of itself physiologically. It's like you're walking. And so when you're walking, you're thereby jogging. And if you're jogging, you're therefore running. So very small amounts of physiological gain can be attained by simply just upping your exercise a fraction more. And people talk about this notion of wearing a heartbeat monitor and keeping it below a certain level. The theory being that if you go to your max, not only will that be challenging, but what then ends up happening is your body might start to preferentially shunt the blood to the muscles that need it and possibly therefore away from the baby. But practically speaking, that would be unlikely because blood's circulating throughout the entirety of your body. But there are associations where people who do sort of endurance and elite athletic events and maybe push a bit too hard, that can potentially have some effects on growth and so on. So to go back to the original question in terms of the exercise and benefits and so on, I would certainly be looking at the things that are obvious that are going to help you. So just walking, going for a bit of a jog, doing some light weights, Pilates, yoga, etc., swimming. But perhaps avoiding things that might be obviously potentially detrimental, things that might involve particularly trauma, and particularly where I say trauma to the abdomen, and as the baby's getting bigger, that would place the baby at risk. So obvious contact sports, rugby and football for those who play, that would be really out of bounds, and boxing. And then, of course, those sports where an inadvertent elbow or a bump could be, obtained, so, netball and basketball. So you're just sort of thinking about where you are in the pregnancy, your energy levels, your ability to be able to compete if you're in a competitive sport environment, the sports that you do that'll make you feel good or not feel so good, and how your body feels and can cope, and then you make that call.
So Pete, you spoke about elevating the heart rate and working to your max. How do you know if you're working without monitoring it? How do you know if you're working hard enough to be getting the benefits of fitness and doing a physical fitness activity and working too hard?
So the purists, the exercise physiologists, athletes, people who really know this sort of stuff would always go to the old acronym that it's your age 220 minus the age. So if you're a 30-year-old woman and your heart rate maximum 220 minus 30, you could say, okay, well, my maximum heart rate would be 190, but that would be your anabolic, anaerobic threshold, and you probably would be able to last that more than maybe a minute or so, and that's non-pregnant. So if we go back to that analogy I used earlier where, you're sitting, you're walking, you're jogging, you're running, It'll only be a very small amount of exercise that's going to generate a metabolic and physiological response and get your heart rate up. So if you choose to wear a heart monitor, you'll probably find that you're what we call that sort of level 2 level of activity, that sort of safe aerobic threshold. You'll probably get to that quite easily with low amounts of exercise. And that's good. You might not think you're pushing yourself, but in actual fact you actually are. Your body is definitely getting a benefit. And that's with respect to, aerobic fitness, so, walking or jogging or swimming, hopping on a spin bike. But then when it comes to other exercises where it's, say weight-based, doing weights, core work, going to do yoga and Pilates. Pilates I'm a massive fan of. It's brilliant during pregnancy, and it's brilliant after pregnancy because of the core stability you'll get, because this baby is going to put a lot of, effects on your body. It's going to stretch your core. It's going to push down on your pelvic floor. It's going to potentially affect your bladder, and you want to return the strength. So Pilates I'm a very effusive fan of. So what it would come down to into doing those sports is, if you're, say, a weightlifter where you might do, 10 kilo dumbbells, if you have the strength to do that, but you feel you can only lift 5, well then go to 5, but you'll still be getting a benefit.
So your body's creating lots of different hormones to obviously help create the baby. Things like estrogen and relaxants in your body to make your body, expand, and potentially it might be putting more pressure on your pelvic floor if you're doing some of these exercises, Pete. How do you negate not hurting your pelvic floor if you're doing these exercises?
For me, as a care practitioner for women, and understanding the effects that housing a baby, growing a baby, the increasing size of the baby, weighing down on the pelvic floor. On top of that, then you've got the relaxative hormones, which by their very nature are relaxing the uterus. That's a positive to stop it expelling the baby pre your due date. But then relaxing other parts of your body, so your pelvis expanding, some of the ligaments can loosen. And that can contribute to a whole lot of ailments, so back pain, etc. But with reference to your pelvic floor question, some sort of weight there. And then for those of you who birth and you have a baby coming through, and if we say on average a 3.5 kilo baby, that's a 3.5 kilo human being coming out through a relatively narrow canal, and not surprisingly the ligaments, the supports, bladder, pelvic floor, the vagina, etc. all get stretched. And so all of those things can have long-lasting and quite significant, for some women, debilitating long-term consequences. And as a care provider for women, I really, really always go on at the postnatal check of all the things we talk about, from contraception, how's the baby, how's the feeding. I really hone in on that one topic. So in pregnancy, if I was to really incline, and this is not a gratuitous plug for Pilates, but for doing your Kegel exercises, your core strengthening work, yoga and Pilates, I cannot be more effusive in how useful they are as tools for maintenance during the pregnancy of your core, and then for rehabilitation of your core after the birth, even if it was by caesarean section.
And then so with something like running, where the baby's like potentially bouncing up and down on those muscles, is that safe in pregnancy? There's
no issue with safety, so I can take that word safely out of the conversation. But, and I'm always very cautious in saying this, because I understand there are women out there who love to run, and I was a runner of years previous until my ageing body caught up with me. But when you have a baby, and that's carried a baby or carried several children, and particularly if you've birthed those children vaginally particularly, it can be very challenging to run, very challenging. And there would be a lot of women out there who would be very open and honest, if you ask them, to admit that having tone and urinary control and sensations of weakness or pressure or prolapse would be quite common. And so running can become a very difficult choice exercise for that woman. Mm. But lament not, because there's so many other ways of keeping fit. And yes, your passion may be running, but you can get a great aerobic response from swimming with no pressure, and also from a spin bike or a bicycle out on the road, and just going for a good walk for some duration, and then doing your Pilates and yoga. And I've got a partner who's extremely effusive about the hot mat Pilates. And I've done it, and you do weights and it's hot, and my gosh, your heart rate's up, you sweat, but you're also stabilising your core at the same time. It's like a triple benefit. So there's lots of other ways of keeping fit and getting an aerobic benefit and a health benefit without having to run. notwithstanding the fact that I understand if that's your passion, it's your passion.
Want some extra tips to help you navigate parenthood? Join a Parents You've Got This masterclass. Visit www.parentsyouvegotthis.com.au and sign up for a masterclass today.
Pete, so it's an interesting one, just circling back to team sports. Obviously, you mentioned that rugby, football, boxing, not a great idea when you're pregnant. Would you advise people to stop those as soon as they realise that they were pregnant? Or does the danger come later on? Obviously, you don't want to be getting a knock to the stomach at any point. But at what stage would you suggest people stop?
Sure. So anytime there is a uterus with a baby that is now up in the abdomen, so it's grown up out of the pelvis and into the abdomen, it is susceptible to an inadvertent knock to the abdomen. And whether that knock at 12 weeks would be as significant as at 28 weeks, you could argue the case a bit, but a knock's a knock. So if you're putting yourself potentially into harm's way for abdominal trauma, you would really think carefully about putting yourself and your baby in that position. Now, when it comes to the other physiological consequences of pregnancy, so notwithstanding the fact that, as I said, if your physiology is already elevated and you're in a team sport where there's an expectation you have to run hard or work hard, you might reach a threshold very quickly and not be able to do that. So that's one impediment. And obviously, when you're carrying extra hormones in your body, and those hormones have a relaxative effect, which can particularly affect joints, so obvious things like your pelvis and your back, but also other parts of your body, it might place your limbs at risk for inadvertent injuries and a high susceptibility to ligamentous and muscular strain and so on. So team sports, I would exercise caution from very early on. What is the exact gestation? Is it 8 weeks or is it 14? I'll let you decide, but I'd like to think common sense would prevail in saying probably best to really maybe wind it back and look for other avenues of exercise.
Maybe be the mascot and the orange bearer for a little while.
If that's your thing. Yeah.
What about group classes, Peter? Is there a point where you think, I can't be doing these high intensity exercise classes throughout the pregnancy, or is it safe right up if you can tolerate it?
Well, again, you can do a high intensity class if you choose to back off your level of intensity individually. That's of course up to you, and probably physiologically you'll need to anyway because you'll notice it and feel it. For me, in pregnancy, for women who might end up taking their maternity leave at a certain gestation, which in Australia is legislated for 34 weeks, and so they've got that 6-week window, and depending on their social circumstances and access to friends in the same situation or other friends who are perhaps working, it's that sort of that socialisation component. And so that's where exercise has another benefit. So beyond the physiological benefit, being in a group environment in whatever capacity it is, a spin class, a Pilates class, etc., you're with people. And I'm very, very, very effusive of this, particularly in the postnatal period. These little people you make, they're just little people, but my lordy, they can really, really take up a lot of your time. But surely you are deserving of 45 minutes or an hour, if not more, in a day to yourself for a bit of self-maintenance, psychologically, physically, etc. And going off to do a class and having that moment, you should do that. And hopefully you'll have the supports in place. The baby will be fine, and you can go and do that, and you'll get a benefit from it.
If you are an elite athlete, Peter, probably exercise is probably the most important thing to them. Do they need to think about their career post-baby, or should they be making any choices with their exercise during that time for the thought of after I have my baby?
I don't think there's a simple answer to this, but what I can simply do is just remind people of the various athletes that we know that have competed at high levels, both in the AFL, if you're into football, at the Olympics, etc. These are women who have had children and gone on to elite. So obviously once you have had your child and your body has recovered from the pregnancy, and then you have that skill and that body ability to be able to go back into that sport, by all means, there'd be no reason that you couldn't do it. Now, obviously the biggest and most interesting and mitigating factor will be the fact that you are now older, and of course age will always get us eventually when it comes to athleticism and so on. But as I said, the women are out there.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, for coming on the Expert Guide to Parenthood podcast to share all your time and expertise around exercise and pregnancy. Thanks, everyone, for sharing your questions with us. Make sure you do that at Parents You've Got This, and we will take those all on board to create our next episode of the Expert Guide to Parenthood podcast. You can listen to that weekly.
A huge thanks to Mistela for sponsoring this episode. Did you know that Mistela is not only for babies and children? Mistela also has a range of maternity products, like the 100% certified organic Stretch Marks oil, Stretch Marks cream, and the certified organic lanolin-free nipple balm made up of 100% natural ingredients and dermatologist tested. Mistela is our family's favourite.
You've been listening to the Expert Guide to Parenthood podcast, and never forget, parents, you've got this.
Join a Parents You've Got This masterclass today to be prepared, excited and educated for pregnancy, birth, baby and parenthood. Visit www.parentsyou'vegotthis.com.au and sign up for a masterclass today.
The information provided in this podcast is general in nature and is intended to support, not replace, a discussion with your doctor or healthcare professional. Parents You've Got This take no responsibility for any medical decisions made by individuals based on the information provided in this podcast.